While I was away, my children sold my dog. I stood in the doorway of my silent home, travel bag still in hand, staring at the empty space where Max should have been bounding toward me, all wagging tail and sloppy kisses. The house felt wrong, hollow in a way that had nothing to do with its physical dimensions. "Brenda, Stephen," I called out, dropping my bag and moving deeper into the house. The silence that answered told me everything. My children were hiding, which meant they'd done something they knew would infuriate me. At 55, I developed a finely tuned radar for their misbehavior, even now that they were supposedly adults. I found them in the kitchen, huddled at the table like conspirators. Stephen, my 32-year-old son, was nursing a beer despite it being barely noon. Brenda, 29 and still sporting the effortless beauty that had always made things too easy for her, was fidgeting with her phone, refusing to meet my eyes. "Where's Max?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the guilty flush creeping up Stephen's neck. They exchanged a look, the same one they'd been sharing since they were children, caught raiding cookie jar. "Mom," Brenda started, her voice honey sweet in that way that always preceded bad news. "How was your retirement paperwork trip? Everything finalized okay with the hospital? Where is my dog?" I repeated, my voice flat and cold. Stephen sighed, taking a long pull from his beer before answering. "We needed money fast. An opportunity came up that couldn't wait." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "You sold Max, my dog, without asking me." "Technically, he's the family dog," Stephen countered weakly. "The family dog that I rescued, that I pay for, that sleeps in my room every night," I replied, my hands curling into fists at my sides. "The dog that has been my constant companion since your father decided his secretary was more appealing than his 20-year marriage. Look, it was a good situation." Brenda jumped in, her tone defensive. "This guy Paul really wanted a Belgian Malinois, and Max looks exactly like one. Max is a mixed breed rescue who happens to resemble a Malinois." Corrected sharply. "I've told you that countless times." "Well, nobody can tell the difference." Stephen shrugged. "Even that dog breeder at the park thought he was purebred." I stared at my children. These strangers who had somehow emerged from my body, who I had raised alone after their father abandoned us, who I had supported through college and beyond, who I had allowed to move back home temporarily during their latest financial setbacks. These people who had sold the being who loved me most in the world without a second thought. Much?" I asked quietly. Another exchanged glance. 8,000. Stephen admitted, a note of pride in his voice. The guy was desperate for a Malinois. $8,000. That's what they'd valued Max at. That's what they'd valued my heart at. I didn't shout. I didn't throw things. Simply asked in the calmest voice I could muster. "Who bought him?" "Mom, it's done," Brenda said, reaching for my hand. Pulled away. "Max is gone. Let's move forward." "Who bought my dog?" I repeated, enunciating each word precisely. "Some older guy named Paul Matthews," Stephen finally answered. "Lives in that new development by the lake seem decent enough. Which, Max will be fine." Turned and walked to my bedroom without another word, closed the door softly behind me, and only then allowed my legs to give way as I sank to the floor. Max's bed sat empty in the corner, his favorite squeaky toy still perched on top where he'd left it when I departed for my trip 5 days ago. After allowing myself exactly 3 minutes of devastation, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number Stephen had reluctantly provided. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice was steady when a deep voice answered. Matthews, Mr. Matthews, my name is Jane Parker, I began, summoning the professional tone I'd perfected during 30 years as a head nurse. Believe you. Recently purchased a dog from my children. A dog that wasn't theirs to sell. There was a brief pause before he responded, his tone noticeably cooling. Mrs. Parker, what an interesting coincidence. I was actually planning to contact you today. It seems your children have created quite a problematic situation. My children sold my dog without permission, I said, cutting to the chase. I'd like to arrange to get him back. Your children did significantly more than that, Matthews replied, an edge entering his voice. They committed fraud by selling a mixed-breed dog under false pretenses, claiming he was a purebred Belgian Malinois with exceptional bloodlines. Unfortunately for them, I'm not just an old, lonely guy looking for company, as they apparently described me. My stomach dropped. Mr. Matthews, I work for an organization that utilizes service dogs for specific operations, he continued. We require Belgian Malinois with certain genetic traits. Your Max is a lovely dog, but he failed every genetic test we conducted this morning. Never claimed he was purebred, I explained quickly. He's a rescue. He just happens to look remarkably like a Malinois. Understand that now, Matthews replied, his tone softening slightly. But your children deliberately misrepresented him to a government agency. That's federal fraud, Mrs. Parker. I closed my eyes. The full weight of what my children had done crashing down on me. I'm so sorry. Had no idea. Believe you, he said, after a moment. But this puts us all in a difficult position. Your children have committed a serious offense. Took a deep breath. Mr. Matthews, I completely understand your anger. What they did was inexcusable, but perhaps we can find a solution that doesn't involve drastic measures. There was a pause, then something that sounded almost like a suppressed chuckle. Mrs. Parker, would you like your dog back? More than anything, I answered without hesitation. And your children, have they learned from their previous mistakes in life? Considered the question, thinking of the string of temporary situations, and just until I get back on my feet arrangements, that had defined my relationship with Stephen and Brenda for the past decade. Honestly, no, I admitted. They've always counted on me to fix their problems. I've always provided a safety net. Then perhaps it's time for a lesson that finally sticks, Matthew suggested, his tone shifting to something almost conspiratorial. I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Parker. One that could return Max to you, teach your children a valuable lesson, and potentially prevent them from spending the next few years in a federal prison. Despite everything, I found myself intrigued. I'm listening. Excellent. I'll be at your house tomorrow at 8 a.m. with Max and some official colleagues. I suggest you don't warn your children of my visit. What exactly are you planning? I asked, a seed of concern forming. Just a bit of educational theater, Matthews replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Nothing that will cause permanent damage, just enough to make them think twice before committing fraud again, or selling property that doesn't belong to. Against all logic, I found myself smiling too. Mr. Matthews, this is highly irregular. Please call me Paul, he responded. And yes, it's irregular. But sometimes irregular lessons are the ones that stick best. What do you say, Jane? Partners in a small crime of parental justice. I looked again at Max's empty bed, thinking of the years of unpaid loans, broken promises, and dodged responsibility. How my Children had casually sold the being I loved most in the world to cover yet another round of financial irresponsibility. 8 a.m. I confirmed. Don't be late, Paul. The next morning I was calmly drinking coffee in the kitchen when the doorbell rang precisely at 8 o'clock. Stephen, still in his pajamas, grumbled something unintelligible as he shuffled to answer, clearly annoyed at being awakened so early. I waited, counting the seconds before my son's surprised yelp echoed down the hallway. It was showtime. Stephen's panicked voice carried through the house. Mom, you need to come here right now. I took my time rising from the kitchen table, smoothing my slacks before walking unhurriedly toward the front door. The scene that greeted me was exactly as I'd imagined during my sleepless night. Stephen stood frozen in the doorway, face ashen. Behind him, I could see Paul Matthews, not the doddering old man my children had described, but a commanding presence in an impeccable suit. His silver hair and fit physique, giving him the air of someone accustomed to authority. Beside him, tail wagging frantically at the sight of me, was Max, straining against his leash, and flanking them were two stern-faced men in dark suits, official-looking badges glinting on their belts. "Good morning," I said calmly, as if finding federal agents at my door was an everyday occurrence. "Mrs. Parker." Paul greeted me with perfect formality, though I caught the glint in his eye. "I believe we spoke yesterday about a matter concerning your children." "Yes, of course," I nodded. "Please come in." "Mom, what the hell is going on?" Stephen hissed as the group entered our living room. Brenda emerged from upstairs, her usual flawless makeup already in place despite the early hour. She stopped mid-step when she saw our visitors, her eyes widening in alarm. "Mr. and Miss Parker," one of the suited men began, his voice clipped and official. "I'm Agent Wilson and this is Agent Cooper. We're here investigating a case of fraud against a federal agency." "Fraud?" Brenda squeaked, her hand flying to her throat. "What are you talking about?" Paul stepped forward, maintaining his grip on Max's leash despite the dog's eager attempts to reach me. 2 days ago you sold this dog to me, representing him as a purebred Belgian Malinois, suitable for specialized work. You charged $8,000 for what you claimed was a dog with excellent bloodlines and perfect working temperament. It was just a figure of speech, Stephen stammered. "Everyone exaggerates when they're selling stuff." "When everyone exaggerates, Mr. Parker," Paul replied coldly, "they typically don't do so to a federal program related to national security. Each dog in our program undergoes complete genetic testing before training begins. Your exaggeration resulted in wasted resources, personnel time, and potentially compromised our operational schedule." "Oh my God," Brenda murmured, sinking onto the nearest chair. "The money is the least of your concerns." Agent Cooper interjected. "Fraud against the federal government, especially involving security programs, is a serious offense. We're talking about potential charges carrying sentences of up to 5 years in federal prison." "Prison?" Stephen's voice cracked like a teenager's. I watched the color drain from my children's faces, fighting to maintain my own neutral expression. Paul and his agents were remarkably convincing, stern and authoritative, without being over the top, serious without veering into caricature. "You need to understand the gravity of what you've done," Paul continued, his voice dropping to an almost educational tone. "Our dogs are essential to operations I can't detail here. The detection work we perform can mean the difference between safety and catastrophe. When you fraudulently introduced an unsuitable animal into our program, you potentially compromised more than you realize. Apparently tired of the conversation about his genetic inadequacies, finally managed to slip his collar and immediately bounded toward me with a joyful whine. I quickly set down my coffee mug before being nearly knocked over by 35 pounds of ecstatic dog who tried to lick every inch of my face while whimpering with happiness. He clearly recognizes his true owner, Agent Wilson observed with a touch of irony. Please, Brenda begged, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. It was a terrible mistake. We had no idea. Isn't there some way to resolve this? The agents exchanged glances while Paul watched me, still receiving Max's enthusiastic welcome home. Something silent passed between us before Paul cleared his throat. Mrs. Parker, he addressed me as the rightful owner of the animal in question, and apparently an innocent party in this fraudulent transaction. Your position may influence how we proceed. Would you care to offer any perspective on this matter? Gently pushed Max aside and stood casually straightening my clothes. My children looked at me with expressions that mixed fear and desperate hope. The mommy who had always rescued them, who had always found a way to cushion their falls. Believe my children made a serious error in judgment. I began, my voice steady and measured. They sold property that wasn't theirs to sell under false pretenses for personal gain. This shows not only dishonesty, but a troubling disregard for consequences. Stephen and Brenda exchanged panicked glances. Was not the maternal defense they had expected. However, I continued after a calculated pause. I don't believe federal prison is necessarily the most constructive response. Perhaps we can find a solution that ensures they fully understand the seriousness of their actions, make appropriate restitution, and establish a path toward more responsible behavior in the future. Paul appeared to consider my words, though a careful observer might have noticed a gleam of approval in his eyes. What do you propose, Mrs. Parker? First, naturally, complete repayment of the funds received, I responded promptly. Second, substantial community service, preferably related to animal welfare. Third, and most importantly, I turned to face my children directly. Immediate independence. No more living with mother. No more financial bailouts. More escaping the consequences of their choices. The agents conferred in hushed tones while Paul observed the Parker siblings with studied intensity. This could be acceptable, he finally declared with some additions. Regular monitoring by our department for a probationary period. Background checks that may limit certain employment opportunities, and naturally a permanent record of this incident in their files, which, while not a criminal conviction, may appear in deeper background investigations in the future. Stephen and Brenda nodded frantically, clearly willing to agree to anything that didn't involve handcuffs. All of this will be formalized in a legal agreement you'll sign today, Agent Cooper added, removing official-looking documents from his briefcase. Breaking any term of this agreement will result in the reinstatement of the original criminal charges with no possibility of future settlement. For nearly an hour, the agents methodically reviewed each clause of the agreement, detailing the various laws Brenda and Stephen had violated, the potential damage they could have caused, and the serious legal repercussions they would face if they breached the terms. Max, oblivious to the human drama, had settled contentedly at my feet, occasionally sighing happily as he received absent-minded pets. When the documents were finally signed and the agents prepared to leave, Paul addressed the Parker siblings one last time. You Got very lucky today, he stated gravely. Your mother showed more faith in your potential for rehabilitation than your actions warranted. I suggest you don't waste this opportunity. As I walked the group to the door, Max, trotting faithfully at my side, Paul paused briefly on the threshold. Max is truly a remarkable dog, he commented, a genuine smile softening his severe features for the first time that morning. Mixed breed or not, he has a character many pedigreed dogs would envy. Thank you for bringing him back, I replied, lowering my voice so my shell-shocked children couldn't overhear. And for the educational production. It was my pleasure, Paul responded with a twinkle in his eye. Your children learned a valuable lesson today, and let's say it was a refreshing change from my normal routine. Perhaps we could discuss the outcome of this educational exercise in a more relaxed setting. Dinner, perhaps. An unexpected warmth crept up my neck. That would be nice. Excellent, he smiled, handing me a business card. Personal number is on the back. And if your children ever question the seriousness of what happened today, they won't, I assured him with a knowing smile. Fear has done its work. The rest is up to me. When the door closed, I returned to the living room where Stephen and Brenda remained seated in stunned silence. Max settled again at my feet as if he'd never been away. Mom, Brenda finally spoke, her voice small and shaky. We almost went to federal prison. Yes, I agreed calmly. You almost did. Why didn't you tell us? You'd spoken to him yesterday, Stephen asked accusingly. We could have prepared or concocted more lies. Finished, my tone still calm, but with a new hardness that made them both flinch. Run away. Continued believing your actions have no consequences. Stephen opened his mouth to argue, but Brenda placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. You're right, she admitted, suddenly looking much younger and more vulnerable without her usual mask of bored sophistication. What we did was terrible to you and to Max. And now we have permanent records with some government agency. Stephen groaned, running his hands over his face. My career is ruined before it even started. I observed my children for a long moment, seeing them clearly for the first time in years, not as the kids I'd protected after the divorce, but as adults who had become specialists in avoiding responsibility. The agreement you signed, I finally said, gives you 1 month to vacate this house. I suggest you start looking for your own place immediately. But Mom, Stephen began to protest. No, I interrupted, my voice surprisingly firm. This is non-negotiable. I love you both more than I can express, but this chapter ends now. You sold my dog for quick cash, with no regard for my feelings or his well-being. If I can trust you so little under my own roof, then it's time we establish a new dynamic. To my surprise, there were no further arguments, just silent nods as the reality of their new situation began to sink in. Later that night, after my children had gone upstairs, Brenda to research affordable apartments online, Stephen to update his resume for the first time in months, I sat on the sofa with Max comfortably nestled against me. The dog seemed to have decided he wouldn't let me out of his sight anytime soon, following me from room to room like an anxious furry shadow. My phone vibrated with a message. Unknown number. Dinner tomorrow night to celebrate our successful operation. I know a great restaurant that allows well-behaved dogs on their outdoor patio. I think we made a good. Besides, Max clearly misses you, though it was a pleasure caring for him for a day, Paul. I smiled, an unexpected warmth spreading in my chest as I stroked Max's soft ears. The last time I'd been on a date was more than 3 years ago. A disaster arranged by Brenda with a friend's cool uncle who had spent the entire evening talking about his ex-wife. I looked down at Max, who returned my gaze with that expression of unconditional canine adoration. "What do you think, boy?" I asked, scratching his favorite spot behind the ears. "Should we give Mr. Matthews a chance?" Max answered with a short, decisive bark. That made me laugh. "I'd love to," I replied, feeling something like butterflies in my stomach. "For the first time in years, Max and I will be waiting." Looking at my faithful companion, now safely back where he belonged, I reflected on the strange paths life sometimes took. My children had made a terrible mistake, but perhaps, just maybe, it would end up being a turning point for all of us. And who could say? Perhaps the man who had helped teach my children such a necessary lesson might bring a new dimension to my newly emancipated life. After all, any man who understood the value of a rescue dog, purebred or not, already had points in his favor. Max sighed contentedly, closing his eyes as he rested his head on my lap. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, all was right in our world again. I woke the next morning to Max's warm weight pressed against my side. His rhythmic breathing, a comforting reminder that he was truly home. For a moment I simply lay there, absorbing the reality that I'd reclaimed not just my dog, but something more essential, my self-respect. The house was quiet. Stephen typically slept until noon, and Brenda was likely avoiding me still. Processing the shock of yesterday's confrontation, I slipped out of bed, Max immediately alert and following as I headed for the kitchen. "Good morning," Brenda's voice startled me. She sat at the kitchen table, already dressed and nursing a cup of coffee. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept much. "You're up early," I observed, moving to the coffee maker. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened yesterday." I poured my coffee and sat across from her. Max settled between us, his head resting on my foot as if afraid I might disappear again. "I'm listening." Brenda stared into her mug. For a long moment. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice small. "What we did was unforgivable." "Yes, it was," I agreed, not rushing to ease her discomfort. "Are you really kicking us out?" she asked, eyes lifting to meet mine. "After everything you've done for us?" "I'm not kicking you out," I corrected. "I'm establishing boundaries that should have been in place years ago." "You're 29, Brenda. Stephen is 32. Living with your mother should be a temporary emergency measure, not a lifestyle." "But we're family," she protested weakly. "Yes, we are, and that's why this has to change." I leaned forward, holding her gaze. "I've enabled you both for too long. After your father left, I was so afraid of failing you that I overcompensated. I've been your safety net, your ATM, and you're made for years. 10s now." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't know if I can make it on my own. I've never tried." I finished for her. "That's the problem, Brenda. You're smarter and more capable than you give yourself credit for. But as long as I continue catching you every time you stumble, you'll never discover what you're truly capable of." She wiped at her eyes, leaving streaks of mascara across her cheeks. "What about Stephen? He's worse off than I am." "Stephen will figure it out too," I said firmly. "He has a degree in computer science that he's never properly used because it's always been easier to borrow money from me than pursue a challenging career." The sound of shuffling footsteps announced my son's arrival. He paused in the doorway, eyes narrowing suspiciously at our serious expressions. What's going on? Mom was just reiterating that we're moving out, Brenda informed him, a new resignation in her voice. That federal agent stuff was just a bluff, Stephen protested, heading for the coffee pot. You can't seriously be making us leave over a mistake. I felt Max tense against my foot, sensing my change in mood. A mistake. I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. You stole and sold my dog, Stephen. You lied to a stranger about Max's breeding to get more money. You betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible. We were desperate, he exclaimed, throwing his hands up. I owed some guys money. They were threatening to. I don't want to hear it. I interrupted. Whatever the reason, you chose to solve your problem by creating a much bigger one for me. That's what you've both been doing for years. Your emergencies always become my emergencies. Your poor choices always become my burden to fix. Stephen slammed his mug down. So, you're just washing your hands of us. Great parenting, Mom. No, Stephen, I replied calmly. Great parenting would have been setting these boundaries years ago. Failed you both. By making everything too easy, by never letting you face the natural consequences of your actions. Now, you're making up for lost time. He snorted derisively. Now I'm correcting my mistake. Agreed. 1 month. Generous considering what you did. You'll find new places to live, new jobs if necessary, and new ways to manage your finances that don't involve using me as a safety net. And if we can't, he challenged. You will, I said with more confidence than I felt. 'Cause you have to. That's how adulthood works for most people. The kitchen fell silent, except for the soft thump of Max's tail against the floor. Finally, Brenda stood up. Going to call Jessica, she announced. Her roommate moved out last month. Maybe she's still looking for someone to split the rent. The shock on Stephen's face at his sister's capitulation would have been comical under different circumstances. You're actually going along with this? He asked incredulously. Brenda shrugged. What choice do we have? We screwed up, Stephen. Big time. And honestly, maybe Mom's right. Maybe it's time we figured out how to stand on our own feet. As she left the kitchen, Stephen glared at me. His expression a mixture of betrayal and fear. This isn't fair. Neither was selling Max, I replied simply. Actions have consequences, Stephen. It's time you learned that. After he stormed out, I finished my coffee in the sudden quiet of the kitchen, Max's head now in my lap as I absently stroked his ears. The confrontation had gone better than expected with Brenda. Worse with Stephen, but the boundary was set. Now I just had to stick to it. My phone chimed with a text message confirming dinner tonight. The Riverside Grill at 7. They have an excellent patio where Max will be welcome. Paul, I smiled despite the emotional weight of the morning. We'll be there. Looking forward to it, Jane. I spent the rest of the day giving Max extra attention, making up for our separation with long walks and his favorite treats. The dog seemed determined not to let me out of his sight, following so closely that I nearly tripped over him several times. At 6:30, I stood before my closet, suddenly paralyzed by indecision. What does one wear to dinner with a man who helped orchestrate a fake federal investigation to teach your adult children a lesson? It had been so long since I'd been on a proper date that I felt like a teenager again. Filled with nervous anticipation, I finally settled on a simple blue dress I hadn't worn in years, surprised to find it still fit perfectly. Casual but elegant. Appropriate for an outdoor restaurant without looking like I was trying too hard. What do you think? Asked Max, who sat watching me get ready with his head tilted inquisitively. Too much. He gave a soft woof that I chose to interpret as approval. As I applied lipstick, another long-forgotten ritual, I caught my reflection in the mirror and was. The woman staring back looked different somehow, more confident, more defined, as if the boundary setting of the past 24 hours had sharpened my edges, bringing me back into focus after years of allowing myself to become a blurry background character in my own life. A soft knock at my bedroom door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting Stephen with another round of complaints. Instead, Brenda peeked in, her expression uncertain. "Wow, Mom, you look really pretty." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by the compliment. She stepped into the room, fidgeting with the sleeve of her sweater. "You're going out with him, aren't you? The government guy." "Paul," I corrected. "And yes, we're having dinner. Is it a date?" Considered the question. "Think so." "That's good," she said softly. "You haven't dated anyone since Dad left." "It's about time." I turned to face her fully, trying to read the emotions behind her words. "Brenda, are you okay with this?" "With everything that's happening," she sighed, sinking onto the edge of my bed. "I'm not okay exactly. But I think I understand. And maybe it's what we all need." "It is," I assured her, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "You and Stephen have so much potential. You just need to stop hiding from it." I called Jessica. She said, "I'm going to look at the room tomorrow. It's small, but I can afford it if I pick up more hours at the boutique." Pride swelled in my chest. "That's a good start." "What about Stephen?" she asked, worry creasing her brow. "He's not handling this well." "Stephen will adjust," I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. "He has to, and so do I. We've all been stuck in this unhealthy pattern for too long." Brenda nodded, then stood and surprised me with a quick hug. "Have fun tonight and tell Max not to wait up," she added with a small smile. After she left, I checked my appearance one final time, grabbed Max's leash and headed for the door. Stephen was nowhere to be seen, but I could hear muffled phone conversations from his room. Whether he was searching for housing options or complaining to friends about his unreasonable mother remained to be seen. As Max and I drove toward the restaurant, I felt a strange mixture of guilt, determination, and something that felt suspiciously like excitement. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was putting myself first, not just in going on this date, but in reclaiming my home, my boundaries, and my life. Max sat in the passenger seat, his head occasionally turning to confirm I was still there. I reached over to scratch behind his ears. "It's a new chapter for all of us, boy," I told him. "Let's see where it leads." I arrived at the Riverside Grill precisely 7. A punctuality habit ingrained from decades of hospital shifts. Max sat obediently at my side as we waited by the entrance, his tail sweeping the ground each time the door opened in anticipation of meeting our dinner companion. The restaurant overlooked the river that divided our town, its spacious stone patio dotted with heat lamps to ward off the early spring chill. A few other patrons had brought their dogs, which reassured me that Max would be welcome. I turned at the sound of my name and found Paul Matthews approaching from the parking lot. Without his stern federal agent persona, he looked different, more approachable in dark jeans and a navy blazer, though no less distinguished. "You look lovely," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. The compliment felt rusty on my ears after so many years of being invisible. "Thank you," I replied, suddenly aware of how long it had been since I'd been on a proper date. Max and I were just admiring the view. At the sound of his name, Max perked up, tail wagging furiously as he recognized his temporary caretaker. To my surprise, he greeted Paul with almost as much enthusiasm as he'd shown me. "He seems to have forgiven me for my part in your little family drama." Paul chuckled, kneeling to scratch behind Max's ears. "Exactly the right spot, I noticed. You two bonded during his brief stay." "We did," Paul confirmed, straightening up. "He's an exceptional dog. You've trained him beautifully." The hostess guided us to a corner table on the patio with a commanding view of the river. Max settled contentedly under the table, his head resting on my foot in what had become his new habit since returning home. "I must admit," Paul said once we were seated, "yesterday's performance was one of the more unusual uses of my professional background." "What exactly is that background?" I asked, realizing I knew almost nothing about this man beyond his theatrical federal agent impression. 22 years with the FBI, he replied, watching my expression carefully. "I retired last year and now consult for a private security firm that does work with service dogs. So well, I've never actually arrested anyone for canine-related fraud. I wasn't entirely acting yesterday. I nearly choked on my water." "You really were a federal agent." "Special Agent, Counterintelligence Division," he confirmed with a slight smile. "Those colleagues of mine weren't agents though, just friends from the security firm who enjoyed playing their roles a bit too enthusiastically." "So, you could have actually arrested my children," I said, slowly processing this new information. Paul's expression grew more serious. "Technically, what they did could qualify as fraud, but it would have been a minor case that likely wouldn't have resulted in charges. The possibility of 5 years in prison was an embellishment for educational purposes." "Thank God," I murmured, though part of me felt Stephen and Brenda deserved the fear they'd experienced. "I'm still wrapping my head around you being an actual FBI agent." "Former agent," he corrected. "Though old habits die hard, as you saw yesterday. Once you've spent 2 decades reading people, building cases, and conducting interviews, you tend to approach every situation a certain way. My including dinner with a woman you barely know." His eyes met mine, warm with amusement, especially then. "Occupational hazard, I'm afraid. I probably already noticed 15 things about you that most people would miss," such as I challenged, oddly intrigued rather than unsettled. "You're left-handed, but use your right hand for certain tasks," he observed. "You've worked in medicine, nursing specifically, evidenced by the way you scanned the restaurant for sanitation issues when we sat down, and the slight callus pattern on your hands from frequent washing. You've been divorced for, I'd guess, around 10 years. And you haven't been on a date in quite some time." I stared at him, caught between impressed and unnerved. Remarkably accurate, though. It's been 12 years since the divorce." "I was close," he shrugged. "Your turn." "My turn to what?" "Tell me what you've observed about me. Everyone notices things. Most people just don't consciously process them." Studied him carefully, accepting the challenge. "You've been divorced too. No wedding ring, but the tan line is still faintly visible. You have a dog of your own based on the hair pattern on your jeans that doesn't match Max's coloring. You're organized to the point of being slightly obsessive, judging by how you rearrange the silverware and condiments." As soon as we sat down, and I hesitated, then decided to take a risk. "Lonely." His eyebrows rose slightly. "What makes you say that?" The way you interacted with Max. Not just friendly, but genuinely connected. Most people pat dogs. You engaged with him. And the fact that you went through all that trouble. Yesterday, the fake investigation, the theater of it all, suggests you don't mind going out of your way to help a stranger with a family problem. People who are fully satisfied with their own lives rarely get that involved in others' dramas. For a moment, I worried I'd overstepped, but then he laughed. A genuine, unguarded sound. Jane, maybe you missed your calling as an investigator. Our conversation flowed easily after that, through dinner and dessert, touching on our careers, our lives post-divorce, and eventually circling back to the events that had brought us together. I have to ask, I said as we lingered over coffee, why did you agree to return Max to me without a fight? You'd paid a considerable sum for him. Paul's expression softened as he glanced down at Max, who had remained a perfect gentleman throughout the meal. Several reasons. First, it was clear from your call that you genuinely loved him while your children were just using him as a convenient ATM. Second, the security firm really does use Malininoa for certain operations, and Max, wonderful as he is, wasn't suitable for that work. And third, I prompted, sensing there was more. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. Third, I was intrigued by a woman who, instead of yelling or threatening when her children sold her dog, calmly called the buyer and proposed a rational solution that showed a level of composure I've rarely encountered. Trust me, I did my yelling after we hung up. Admitted into a pillow so they wouldn't hear. Still, you controlled your reaction when it mattered. He leaned forward slightly. That's rare, Jane. Most people let emotions dictate their actions, especially in crisis. Years of emergency room nursing, I explained. You learn to compartmentalize or you don't survive the job. As the evening wound down, Paul insisted on walking Max and me to my car. The night had grown chilly, and I shivered slightly in my light dress. Here, he said, slipping off his blazer and draping it over my shoulders before I could protest. The gesture was so old-fashioned, so courteous that it momentarily left me speechless. Thank you, I managed finally, inhaling the subtle scent of his cologne from the fabric for the jacket and for dinner and for yesterday. My pleasure, he replied, his voice lower in the darkness, though I hope our future interactions won't require elaborate sting operations. Future interactions, I echoed, my heart doing a ridiculous little flutter. I'd very much like to see you again, Jane, he said simply, without a federal investigation as pretext. Without Max's intermediary, though he's welcome to join us. We'd reached my car and I turned to face him, still wrapped in his blazer. Max sat patiently beside us, looking from one human to the other, as if following tennis match. I'd like that too, I admitted. For a moment we stood in comfortable silence. The night air, filled with the sound of the river and distant restaurant conversations. Then Paul leaned forward slowly, giving me plenty of time to step back if I wanted to. I didn't. His kiss was gentle, questioning rather than demanding. When we separated, I was grateful for the dim parking lot lighting that hid the blush I could feel warming my cheeks. You should get home, I said reluctantly. I have a feeling tomorrow will bring another round of negotiations with Stephen. Of course, Paul nodded. May I call you tomorrow? I'd be disappointed if you didn't, I replied, surprised by my own boldness. As Max and I drove home, I found myself smiling at nothing in particular. 12 years since my divorce. And I'd finally had a date that didn't feel like an obligation or a disaster. A date that ended with a kiss that made me Feel like something other than just a mother, a nurse, a responsible adult. The house was dark when we arrived, though a faint blue light from beneath Stephen's door suggested he was still awake, likely gaming or watching videos. Max trotted through the familiar rooms, doing his nightly patrol before settling on his bed in my room with a contented "Ugh." I hung Paul's blazer carefully on my closet door, making a mental note to return it on our next meeting. Thought of seeing him again sent another little flutter through my chest, a sensation so long forgotten that it took me a moment to recognize it as simple happiness. As I prepared for bed, I checked my phone to find a text from "Oh, thank you for a wonderful evening. Max was the perfect chaperone. Looking forward to seeing you again soon." I typed back, "The pleasure was mine. Max gives you his approval, which is high praise indeed." His reply came swiftly. "I'm honored. Sleep well, Jane." Simple words, yet they warmed me as I slipped under the covers. Max jumped up to settle beside me, a privilege I rarely allowed, but felt he'd earned after his ordeal. "What do you think, boy?" I whispered, scratching his favorite spot. "Are we really doing this dating at my age?" Max's only response was to press closer against my side, his steady breathing eventually lulling me towards sleep. Whatever tomorrow brought with my children, at least today had given me something I hadn't expected. A reminder that my life still held possibilities beyond being a safety net. For Stephen and Brenda. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I fell asleep thinking about my own future, not just theirs. The next morning brought reality crashing back in the form of Stephen's voice, loud and agitated, coming from the kitchen. I dressed quickly, wondering what new crisis had emerged. Overnight, Max followed at my heels as I ventured downstairs to find Stephen pacing, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what the policy says," he was saying, his free hand gesticulating wildly. "I've been a customer for 3 years. You can't just—" He broke off, listening, then cursed. "Fine, whatever." He slammed the phone down on the counter and turned to find me watching from the doorway. "Problems?" asked mildly. "Credit card company froze my account," he muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Said I missed too many minimum payments." "That tends to happen," I agreed, moving past him to start the coffee. "What will you do? What do you think?" he countered, his tone accusatory. "I need to borrow some money to get them off my back until—" "No," I interrupted calmly. The single word hung between us. Simple and non-negotiable. Stephen stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "What do you mean?" "No," he sputtered. "Mom, this is serious. They're talking about sending it to collections." "I understand it's serious," I replied, measuring coffee grounds with deliberate precision. "But my answer is still no. You're 32, Stephen. Figure it out." His face flushed with anger. "So this is how it's going to be now. I make one mistake. Selling my dog wasn't one mistake." I corrected him, keeping my voice level despite the anger flaring in my chest. "It was the final straw after years of mistakes that I've covered for you. And now you're experiencing what happens when there's no safety net. Is about that Matthews guy, isn't it?" Stephen's voice turned bitter. "You have one date and suddenly you're a different person." I turned to face him fully. "This has nothing to do with Paul. This is about me finally setting the boundaries I should have established years ago. Your financial problems are exactly that. Yours unbelievable," he muttered. "My own mother." "Yes, your mother," I agreed. "Not your bank, not your personal assistant, not your maid. Your mother who loves you enough to stop enabling behavior that's hurting you in the long run. He stormed out without another word, stomping up the stairs like the teenager he still resembled in so many ways. Sighed, pouring my coffee and settling at the kitchen table. Max resting his head on my knee sympathetically. My phone buzzed with a text from Paul. Good morning. Hope I'm not texting too early. Wondering if you and Max might join me for a walk by the lake this afternoon. Despite the confrontation with Steven, I found myself smiling as I typed back. Not too early at all. A walk sounds perfect. 2 p.m. His response came quickly. 2 p.m. It is. Looking forward to it. A throat cleared in the doorway and I looked up to find Brenda watching me, an expression somewhere between amusement and concern on her face. You're smiling at your phone, she observed, moving to pour herself coffee. Must be the government man. Paul, I corrected automatically. And yes, we're going for a walk this afternoon. Brenda sat across from me, studying my face with uncharacteristic intensity. You really like him, don't you? Just a walk, Brenda. She hummed disbelievingly. That's why. You're glowing like a teenager with her first crush. I felt my cheeks warm. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not judging, she assured me, reaching over to pat Max's head. It's nice to see you interested in something besides work. And well, the admission surprised me. I didn't realize you'd noticed. Course I noticed, she replied, looking slightly offended. I'm self-absorbed, Mom, not blind. You've been on autopilot for years. Everything about you, your job, your schedule, your entire life has revolved around supporting Steven and me. That's what mothers do, I said, though the justification sounded hollow even to my own ears. To an extent, Brenda agreed. But there's a difference between supporting your children and subjugating your entire existence to them, especially when the children are supposedly adults. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. When had my daughter developed this level of self-awareness? Anyway, she continued, taking a sip of coffee. I'm going to look at Jessica's place today, and I talked to my manager about increasing my hours at the boutique. She said if I can commit to a regular schedule, she might consider an assistant manager position. Brenda, that's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. I didn't know you were interested in retail management. She shrugged, but I caught the flicker of pride in her eyes. It's not what I pictured doing with my marketing degree. But it's a start, and I actually enjoy it when I'm not treating it as just a way to fund my social life. Have you told your brother about these plans? Her expression clouded. I tried, but he's in full victim mode. Says we should be sticking together against your unreasonable demands. She made air quotes around the last two words. Think he expected me to join his rebellion? And you're not going to? No, she said simply. This is long overdue. For all of us, including Steven, even if he can't see it yet. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Unexpected emotion tightening my throat. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise, she replied with a flash of her old self-confidence. I just chose to ignore my wisdom when it was more convenient to let you solve all my problems. After she left to get ready for her apartment viewing, I sat finishing my coffee, Max still leaning against my leg as if afraid I might disappear again. The conversation with Brenda had left me feeling both hopeful and uncertain, pleased by her apparent maturity, yet worried about Steven's continued resistance. The time I left to meet Paul, Steven still hadn't emerged from his room, though I could hear him on the phone. Again, his tone alternating between charm and desperation, as he presumably worked his way through his list of friends who might bail him out. I left a note telling him I'd be back later, though I doubted he'd care where I was going or who I was with. The lakeside park was crowded with weekend visitors enjoying the spring sunshine. I spotted Paul immediately standing near the water's edge, hands in his pockets as he gazed across the lake. He turned as Max, and I approached, his face lighting with a smile that made my pulse quicken embarrassingly. "You found me," he said, bending to greet Max before straightening to meet my eyes. "FBI training at work," I joked. "Suspect. Located approximately 50 yards from the designated meeting point, displaying conspicuous behavioral patterns." He laughed, the sound warm in the afternoon air. "Clearly I need to work on my evasion techniques." We began walking along the lakeside path, Max trotting happily between us, occasionally stopping to investigate interesting scents or receive admiring paths from passing children. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from books we'd recently read to childhood memories of family vacations. "How are things at home?" Paul asked, after a while. "Any fallout from our little operation?" I sighed, filling him in on Brenda's apparent transformation and Stephen's continued resistance. "I'm worried about him," I admitted. "He's never had to truly stand on his own before. I'm not sure he knows how." "He'll learn," Paul assured me. "Sometimes the only way to swim is to find yourself in deep water." "I just hope he doesn't drown first," I murmured. Paul stopped, turning to face me fully. "You're doing the right thing, Jane, for all of you. It's not easy, but it's necessary." "I know," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "It's just they've been my whole world for so long, especially after the divorce. I poured everything into being there for them, into making sure they never felt the abandonment their father inflicted. And in the process, you abandoned yourself," Paul observed gently. The words hit with unexpected force, laying bare a truth I'd never fully acknowledged. I had abandoned myself, my needs, my desires, my identity separate from motherhood. "Yes," I whispered, throat tight. "Suppose I did." Paul reached out, taking my hand in his. "Maybe it's time to find yourself again." Max chose that moment to bark excitedly at a passing squirrel, lunging forward and nearly pulling me off balance. Paul steadied me, his hand warm against my back, and we both laughed at the dog's single-minded focus on the retreating rodent. "Sorry about that," I apologized as Max calmed down. "He has strong opinions about squirrels. A dog of discerning tastes." Paul nodded seriously, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. "Shall we continue? There's a nice cafe around the bend that serves excellent lemonade and allows dogs on their terrace." As we walked on, his hand found mine again, our fingers intertwining with comfortable familiarity. I couldn't remember the last time I'd held hands with someone, and the simple contact felt both foreign and essential, like rediscovering a forgotten pleasure. At the cafe, we claimed a table overlooking the water, Max settling contentedly at our feet. Paul insisted on paying for our drinks despite my protests. "You can get the next one," he said, and the casual implication that there would be many more outings warmed me more than the spring sunshine. "Tell me something you've always wanted to do but haven't," he said after our lemonades arrived. I considered the question, realizing how rarely I thought about my own desires anymore. "Travel," I finally answered. "I've never been out of the country. Always planned to go to Italy someday, but then life happened. Kids, career, divorce. Italy is beautiful." Oh, nodded. "I spent 6 months in Rome on assignment early in my career. The food alone is worth the trip. You've traveled. A lot. I asked, genuinely curious about his life before I knew him. Nature of the job, he confirmed, though mostly to places the average tourist would avoid. But after retirement I took myself on a proper vacation. No badge, no gun, no responsibilities beyond deciding which wine to have with dinner. That sounds wonderful, I said, trying to imagine a life where my biggest concern was wine selection. It was, he agreed, and it could be for you too. Now, Italy is still there, waiting for you to discover it. The suggestion lingered between us, tantalizing in its possibilities. What was stopping me now? My children were adults. I had retirement savings and, for the first time in decades, no one depended on me for their daily survival. Even Max could be boarded, or the thought came unbidden, perhaps Paul would watch him again. Maybe, I said, allowing myself to contemplate the possibility. Once everything settles down with Stephen and Brenda, Paul's eyes held mine. Don't wait too long, Jane. Life has a way of filling whatever space we give it. If you don't make room for your dreams, other demands will happily occupy that territory. As Max and I drove home later, his words echoed in my mind. How many times had I deferred my own desires, always putting them off until some unspecified future when everyone else's needs had been met, a future that never seemed to arrive. The house was quiet when we returned. Note from Brenda on the counter informing me she'd be back late. She was having dinner with Jessica to discuss the apartment. No sign of Stephen, though his car was still in the driveway. I fed Max, then fixed myself a simple dinner, enjoying the rare peace of an empty house. As I ate, I opened my laptop and found myself Googling Italy travel packages. Just looking, I told myself, just considering possibilities. By the time I went to bed, I'd bookmarked 3 potential itineraries and requested information from a travel agency, specializing in solo tours for women over 50. Not a commitment, I reminded myself. Just exploring options. Mac jumped up to join me, circling 3 times before settling against my side with a contented sigh. I stroked his soft fur, thinking about Paul's words about abandoned selves and rediscovered dreams. Things are changing, boy, I whispered. For all of us. I woke to the sound of shattering glass followed by cursing. Instantly alert, I glanced at the clock, 3:17 a.m., and slipped out of bed. Max was already at the door, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Shoo, I whispered, placing a calming hand on his head. Me check. The hallway was dark, but light spilled from the kitchen below. I crept down the stairs, Max following despite my signal. Z. At the bottom I paused, listening. Stupid, worthless. Stephen's voice slurred and angry. Another crash followed. I rounded the corner to find my son swaying in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by broken glass and spilled liquor. An empty bottle lay on its side near his feet, and he was fumbling with another from the cabinet where I kept a few spirits for special occasions. Stephen said cautiously. He spun around, nearly losing his balance. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes disheveled. Well, look who's here, he sneered. Mother of the year. You're drunk. Stated the obvious, surveying the destruction and making a mess. What do you care? He snarled, gesturing wildly, with the bottle still clutched in his hand. You've made it perfectly clear we're just burdens to you. Max pressed against my leg, sensing the tension. His presence steadied me as I took a deep breath, determined not to escalate the situation. Put the bottle down, Stephen, I said calmly. Let's get this cleaned up and we can talk in the morning when you're sober. Always so reasonable, he mocked, taking a swig directly from the bottle. Perfect Jane. Parker never loses her cool, just calmly destroys her children's lives. Enough, I said. My patience wearing thin. You're 32 years old, not 17. Behavior is unacceptable. Acceptable, he repeated mockingly. Now what's unacceptable? My own mother choosing some random guy over her children. Kicking us out because her new boyfriend doesn't like us cramping her style. This has nothing to do with Paul, I replied, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. This is about you and Brenda learning to stand on your own feet. And if you're so concerned about having a place to live, destroying my kitchen at 3 o'clock in the morning isn't exactly your best strategy. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Your kitchen, your house, your dog, everything's yours, isn't it? God forbid we touch any of your precious possessions. Stephen, you're drunk and upset. Let's talk tomorrow. No, he shouted, slamming the bottle down on the counter so hard I feared it might break too. We're talking now. You want to know what my day was like? I spent 8 hours calling everyone I know, begging for money or a place to crash. Know what I learned? Nobody wants a 32-year-old loser who lives with his mommy. The raw pain beneath his anger was palpable, but I steeled myself against the familiar urge to rescue him. I'm sorry it was difficult, I said quietly. But facing these realities is part of growing up. Something you've avoided for too long. Growing up, he sneered. Is that what you're doing with your FBI boyfriend? Having a midlife crisis. I felt my composure slipping. My relationship with Paul is none of your concern, and I suggest you stop now before you say something you'll regret. Or what? He challenged, his expression ugly with alcohol and resentment. You'll kick me out sooner. Report me to your fake federal agent friends, or you'll damage our relationship beyond repair, I replied honestly. I'll always love you, Stephen, but I'm quickly losing respect for you, and once that's gone, it's very hard to get back. Something in my tone must have penetrated his drunken haze. He blinked, momentarily silent, then reached for the bottle again. Leave it, I said sharply. You've had enough. Don't tell me what to do, he muttered, but his defiance seemed half-hearted. Oh. Then act like an adult I don't need to give instructions to, I countered. Clean up this mess, go to bed, and in the morning start figuring out your life instead of blaming me for your problems. I turned to leave, signaling for Max to follow. He's not coming back, you know. Stephen called after me, his voice suddenly small. Didn't, and this Paul guy won't either. They never do. I stopped, my heart aching despite my anger. This then was the real wound. Not just my withdrawal of financial support, but the fear of another abandonment. Stephen had been 15 when his father left, old enough to understand betrayal, but not its causes. Paul isn't your father, I said without turning around. And I'm not the same woman your father left. Whatever happens between Paul and me has nothing to do with you and Brenda. But you need to understand something, Stephen. Even if he walked away tomorrow, nothing would change. This new boundary is permanent. I continued upstairs without waiting for his response, though I heard what sounded like a choked sob behind me. Every maternal instinct urged me to go back to comfort my hurting child. But the rational part of me knew that comfort now would only reinforce the pattern we were trying to break. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of my bed, trembling slightly from the confrontation. Max pressed his warm body against my legs, offering silent support. "I'm doing the right thing," I whispered, as much to convince myself as anything. "He needs this, even if he hates me for it." From downstairs came the sound of halting movements, then the tentative clink of glass being collected. At least he was cleaning up his mess, a small step, but perhaps the beginning of accepting responsibility. I lay back down, though I knew sleep would be elusive now. My phone glowed with a text notification I hadn't noticed earlier. "Thinking of you. I had a wonderful time today. Sweet dreams." Paul's simple message brought an involuntary smile to my lips despite the turmoil of the night. Type back, knowing he wouldn't see it until morning. "Tonight was difficult with Stephen, but I'm standing firm. Support means more than you know. Thank you for a lovely day." As I set the phone aside, I realized something had shifted within me. 6 months ago, even 6 weeks ago, I would have rushed to smooth things over with Stephen, to protect him from the consequences of his actions, to restore family harmony at any cost. Despite the pain it caused us both, I was holding the line. It wasn't about punishment. It wasn't even about teaching him a lesson. It was about finally acknowledging that the greatest disservice I could do my children was to prevent them from experiencing the natural outcomes of their choices, both good and bad. Max settled beside me with a soft huff, his solid presence reassuring. Whatever the morning brought, whatever challenges lay ahead, with Stephen and Brenda, I wasn't facing them alone anymore. I had my faithful dog, a new relationship full of possibility, and most importantly, a growing sense of my own worth beyond motherhood. For now, that would have to be enough. Morning brought a silent, tense house. I found the kitchen spotless, evidence that Stephen had eventually cleaned his mess, but there was no sign of my son. His bedroom door remained firmly shut when I passed it. No sounds emerging to indicate whether he was awake or still sleeping off his night of drinking. Max followed me downstairs, his nails clicking on the hardwood as I made coffee and contemplated the day ahead. Had the late shift at the hospital tomorrow, my final week before retirement officially began. The thought brought a mixture of relief and anxiety. 30 years of structured purpose coming to an end, leaving me to define my own priorities. For the first time since college, Brenda appeared around 10 o'clock, looking unusually cheerful despite the early hour. "Morning," she greeted, heading straight for the coffee pot. "You look tired. Everything okay? Your brother had a rough night," I answered diplomatically. "How was dinner with Jessica?" "Great." She perched on a stool at the counter, clutching her mug. "I'm taking the room. It's small, but the rent's reasonable, and it's close to the boutique. Move in next weekend." "That's wonderful, Brenda," I said, genuinely pleased by her initiative. "I'm proud of you," she smiled, the simple praise clearly meaningful to her. "Thanks. I know this hasn't been easy for any of us, but I think it's going to be good for all of us." "I hope so," I agreed, though thoughts of Stephen's drunken rage gave me pause. "Have you heard from your government man today?" she asked, changing the subject with a teasing glint in her eye. "His name is Paul, and yes, we texted this morning," I admitted, feeling oddly shy, discussing my dating life with my daughter. "He's invited me to dinner at his place tomorrow night. Home-cooked meal." Brenda waggled her eyebrows suggestively. "Things are getting serious." I rolled my eyes, though I couldn't suppress a smile. "It's just dinner, Brenda." "If you say so," she sang, clearly unconvinced. "What are you wearing?" "I haven't thought about it yet," I admitted. "You should," she declared suddenly. "All business. First time at his place is a statement opportunity. Not too casual but not overly formal either. You want to look effortless but intentional." Despite myself, I laughed. "When did you become a dating expert?" "I may be terrible at money management and life decisions, but fashion and dating strategy." She flipped her hair dramatically. "That's my superpower." The moment of levity was interrupted by Stephen's appearance. He stood in the doorway, pale and disheveled, eyes bloodshot and puffy. The casual observer might attribute his appearance to hangover alone, but I recognized the evidence of tears as well. "Morning," he mumbled, not meeting anyone's eyes as he shuffled toward the coffee. Brenda shot me a questioning look, but I shook my head slightly, silently, asking her not to press for details about last night's confrontation. "I was just telling Mom I found a place," she said instead, her tone deliberately upbeat. "Jessica's roommate moved out, so I'm taking the room." Stephen grunted noncommittally, focusing intently on doctoring his coffee with sugar and cream. "Have you made any progress with your housing search?" I asked carefully. He shrugged, still avoiding eye contact. "Maybe. Looking at a few options." The lie was transparent, but I chose not to challenge it. Last night's explosion had cleared the air somewhat, exposing the raw hurt beneath his anger. Pushing now would only drive him back behind his defensive walls. "Let me know if you need help with moving logistics," I offered for both of you. Stephen finally looked up, surprise, briefly replacing the guardedness in his expression. "You'd still help with that?" "Course," I replied simply. "Setting boundaries doesn't mean I've stopped caring, Stephen. Just means I'm changing how I show it." He processed this for a moment, then nodded slightly before retreating with his coffee. The conversation apparently exhausting his limited social resources for the morning. After he left, Brenda whistled softly. "What happened last night?" I sighed, giving her an abbreviated version of Stephen's drunken confrontation, while omitting some of his cruel accusations. "He'll come around," she said when I finished, though she sounded less certain than before. "He just needs time to process. This is harder for him than for me." "Why do you think that is?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. She considered the question seriously. "Stephen was always Dad's favorite. When Dad left, it hit him differently, like double rejection. I think he transferred all that need for approval to you, and now he feels like you're abandoning him too." Frog. "Plus he's a guy. They have more ego wrapped up in the whole independence thing." The insight surprised me again. I found myself wondering when my fashionista daughter had developed such emotional intelligence. "That's remarkably perceptive, Brenda. Not just a pretty face, Mom," she replied with a wink, sliding off the stool. "Now about tomorrow's outfit for your date." The rest of the day passed uneventfully. Stephen remained in his room, emerging only for bathroom breaks and to forage for food. I took Max for a long walk, the spring air filled with the scent of new blossoms and fresh-cut grass. Paul texted several times, casual, warm messages that made me smile like a schoolgirl with her first crush. By evening, I found myself in front of my closet evaluating options for tomorrow's dinner at Paul's house, with Brenda offering commentary from her perch on my "But not that one," she objected when I held up a sensible navy dress. "To job interview. You want something softer, more feminine." I am 55, Brenda, I reminded her dryly. Not 25. Just irrelevant, she declared with the confidence of youth. What matters is how the clothes make you feel. She rummaged through my closet, pushing hangers aside with increasing dismay. Mom, when was the last time you bought something just because it made you feel pretty? I tried to remember. Before the divorce. Maybe. For a work function 5 years ago. The question exposed yet another way I'd neglected my own needs and desires over years. I can't remember, I admitted. Brenda's expression softened. Settles it. We're going shopping tomorrow. You need something special for this date. I have a shift tomorrow, I reminded her. You're off at 3 o'clock, right? The mall's open until 9 o'clock. Plenty of time. Her tone borked no argument. Consider it my thank you for not throwing us out on the street immediately. Despite my protests about unnecessary expenses, part of me was touched by her enthusiasm and by the prospect of spending time together that didn't involve crisis management or financial support. All right, I conceded, but nothing too revealing or expensive. Trust me, she grinned. Going to find something that makes FBI man's eyes pop out of his head. His name is Paul, I corrected for what felt like the 100th time, though I couldn't help smiling at her description. After she left, I sat on the edge of my bed, suddenly overcome by the strangeness of it all. A week ago, my life had followed the same patterns it had for years. Work, home, enabling my adult children, occasional outings with Max, rinse and repeat. Now everything was shifting. My relationship with Stephen and Brenda, my impending retirement, my unexpected connection with Paul. Max jumped up beside me, resting his head on my knee, as if sensing my tumultuous thoughts. I scratched behind his ears, grateful for his steady presence through all the changes. What do you think, boy? I asked softly. Is it possible to rewrite your life at 55? He looked up at me, with complete confidence in his soulful eyes, and I chose to interpret his gentle woof as an affirmative. Perhaps. This was the silver lining to my children's betrayal in selling Max not just his safe return, but the cascade of changes it had triggered. Without that catalyst, I might have continued in my comfortable rut indefinitely, watching life pass by while I focused solely on others' needs. Now, for the first time in decades, I was contemplating my own desires, my own future. And surprisingly, despite the tension with Stephen and the uncertainty ahead, I felt more alive than I had in years. The shopping expedition with Brenda proved surprisingly enjoyable. After my final shift at the hospital, a bittersweet 6 hours of goodbyes and well wishes from colleagues I'd worked alongside for decades, I met my daughter at the mall, feeling oddly nervous about the whole enterprise. Relax, Mom, Brenda said, linking her arm through mine as we navigated the crowded corridors. This is supposed to be fun, not a root canal. I haven't shopped for date clothes in 15 years, I reminded her. I'm not even sure what's appropriate anymore. That's why you have me, she replied, confidently, steering me toward a boutique I'd passed countless times, but never entered. Trust the expert. For the next 2 hours, I tried on more outfits than I had in the previous 5 years combined. Brenda was a surprisingly thoughtful stylist, selecting pieces that flattered my figure without pushing me too far beyond my comfort zone. She rejected anything matronly. You're dating, not attending a church social, Mom, while also vetoing items I found too revealing. We want elegant with a hint of sexy, not desperate housewife. Eventually, we settled on a soft wrap dress in a deep teal that Brenda insisted brought out my eyes, paired with heeled sandals that added height without sacrificing comfort. The outfit was undeniably more stylish than my usual practical attire. Yet it still felt like me, just a slightly more polished version. What do you think? Brenda asked as I examined my reflection. I love it, I admitted, surprised by how much I meant it. The woman in the mirror looked confident, attractive, and yes, even a little sexy. All things I hadn't associated with myself in far too long. Paul won't know what hit him, she declared with satisfaction. As we left the store with our purchases, Brenda suggested stopping for coffee, sitting across from her in the cafe, watching her chat animatedly about her new job responsibilities and apartment plans. I felt a shift in our relationship. Less mother otter, more like friends. Equal adults sharing their lives rather than one constantly rescuing the other. I don't think I've properly thanked you, I said during a lull in conversation. Brenda looked puzzled. For what? The dress. You paid for it, for adapting so gracefully to these changes, I explained, for understanding why they're necessary instead of fighting me like your brother. She stirred her latte thoughtfully. I was angry at first, she admitted. When you said we had to move out, my initial reaction was pure indignation. How dare you, after all these years of supporting us? But then I started thinking about what my life would look like in 5 years if nothing changed. And I prompted when she paused. And it was depressing, she said bluntly. Still living in my childhood bedroom, working a job I treat as temporary, even though I've been there 3 years, watching my friends build careers and relationships while I'm stuck in permanent adolescence. I shrugged. Once I saw it that way, I realized you're doing us a favor, not punishing. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'm so proud of you, Brenda. I know this isn't easy. Not, she agreed. But neither is watching your mother put her entire life on hold while you waste your potential. That's a different kind of burden. Her words hit me with unexpected force. I'd always viewed my sacrifices as necessary, even noble, the essence of good mothering. It had never occurred to me that my children might feel guilt or responsibility for how completely I'd subsumed my identity into caring for them. Well, I said, trying to lighten the suddenly emotional moment. You don't need to worry about that anymore. As you can see, I'm officially rejoining the land of the living. Good, she replied firmly. You deserve it, Mom. You've given us everything. It's your turn now. By the time we arrived home, laden with shopping bags and takeout for dinner, I felt closer to my daughter than I had in years. Stephen's car was gone from the driveway, a small relief given my nervousness about the evening ahead. He's probably at Ryan's, Brenda surmised when I mentioned his absence. They've been gaming buddies forever. Ryan has a spare room in his apartment. That might be Stephen's best option if he can swallow his pride enough to ask. Nodded, hoping she was right. Despite his resistance, I wanted Stephen to land on his feet just as Brenda was doing. The point wasn't to punish him, but to launch him into the independent adulthood he'd been avoiding. Later, as I prepared for my date with perhaps more care than I'd taken with my appearance, in a decade, I found myself humming, an unconscious expression of happiness that caught me by surprise. Max watched from his spot on the bed, head tilted in curious observation. What do you think? I asked, turning to give him the full effect of the new dress and the subtle makeup Brenda had insisted on applying for me. Max's tail thumped enthusiastically against the comforter. I'll take that as approval. I laughed, bending to ruffle his ears. Now remember, you're staying with Brenda tonight. Be a good boy for her. After one final check in the mirror, I headed downstairs where Brenda waited to give her assessment. "Wow, Mom," she said, eyes widening appreciatively. "You look amazing." "Not too much," I asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Perfect," she assured me. Sophisticated but approachable. The dress was definitely the right choice. The drive to Paul's house gave me time to battle my nerves. It had been so long since I'd been on a proper date, let alone one at a man's home. What if I'd misread his interest? What if the conversation faltered? Without the buffer of a public setting. Paul lived in a neat craftsman-style house in one of the older neighborhoods, near downtown. As I pulled into his driveway, I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was a grown woman, not a teenager on her first date. He opened the door before I could knock, greeting me with a warm smile. That immediately calmed my nerves. "Jane," he said, his eyes taking in my appearance with undisguised appreciation. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," I replied, pleased by his reaction. "Something smells wonderful." "Promised a home-cooked meal," he said, ushering me inside. "I hope you like Italian." The interior of his home reflected its owner. Tasteful, well-organized, with subtle touches of warmth that softened the bachelor aesthetic. Books lined the walls of the living room, interspersed with framed photographs and what appeared to be artifacts from his travels. A large German shepherd rose from his bed by the fireplace, approaching to inspect me with dignified curiosity. "This is Rex," Paul introduced. "Rex, this is Jane, Max's person." I offered my hand for the dog to sniff, smiling when he gave it a gentle lick of approval. "It's nice to meet you, Rex. Max sends his regards." "He's usually more reserved with visitors," Paul observed as Rex settled contentedly beside me when I sat on the sofa. "You must have the touch. Dogs can sense dog people," I replied, scratching behind Rex's ears the way I knew most canines appreciated. "He's beautiful and knows it." Paul chuckled. "Can I get you a glass of wine? Dinner's almost ready." The evening unfolded with the same easy comfort we'd established on our previous outings. Paul was an excellent cook, the pasta dish he'd prepared rivaling anything I'd had in restaurants. The conversation flowed naturally, covering everything from books we'd enjoyed to his FBI career to my nursing experiences. "So tomorrow's officially your first day of retirement," he noted as we lingered over tiramisu. "How does it feel?" "Surreal," I admitted. 30 years of structure suddenly gone. I'm not entirely sure what comes next. "That's the beauty of it," he said, refilling our wine glasses. "You get to decide. No more schedule dictated by hospital shifts or your children's needs. Just pure possibility." It's both liberating and terrifying, I confessed. I've defined myself as a nurse and a mother for so long. Without those roles, who am I? Paul's expression grew thoughtful. "That's the most exciting question of all, isn't it? Who is Jane Parker when she's simply herself? Who is Jane Parker when she's simply herself?" Paul's question lingered in the air between us, profound in its simplicity. Took a sip of wine, considering how to answer. "I'm not sure I know anymore," I admitted. "I've spent so many years being what everyone else needed that I've lost track of my own desires." Paul reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "Then perhaps that's your first retirement project. Rediscovering Jane." His touch sent a pleasant warmth through me that had nothing to do with the wine. Any suggestions on where to start? What did you dream about before life got in the way? He asked, his eyes holding mine with genuine interest. What did young Jane Parker want before she became a nurse, a wife, a mother? The question transported me back decades to a younger version of myself, with ambitions I'd almost forgotten. I wanted to travel, I said slowly. See places I'd only read about in books. I wanted to learn photography, not just snapshots but real artistic expression. Paul nodded encouragingly. What else? I wanted to volunteer with a wildlife rehabilitation center, I continued. Memories surfacing like bubbles in still water. I've always connected with animals, but nursing humans took precedence. Those all sound like dreams that are still very much within reach, Paul observed. They do, don't they? Smiled, feeling a spark of excitement at possibilities I hadn't considered in years. What about you? Did retired life match your expectations? Not at first, he admitted. The bureau had been my identity for so long that I felt rudderless without it. The security consulting work helps, but it took me months to adjust to civilian life. Now I'm learning to appreciate the freedom, he said. The ability to choose projects that interest me, to travel without checking in with a supervisor, to pursue personal connections. His eyes met mine with unmistakable meaning. The moment hung between us, charged with potential. Then Rex stretched and sighed dramatically at our feet, breaking the tension and making us both laugh. He has opinions about the pacing of this relationship. Paul chuckled, standing to clear our dessert plates. Come on, I want to show you something. He led me through the house to a back door that opened onto a small but immaculately maintained garden. Solar lanterns illuminated a stone path winding through flowering shrubs and carefully placed perennials. At the center stood a wooden bench facing a small pond where water lilies floated serenely on the surface. This is beautiful, I breathed, taking in the peaceful sanctuary. My retirement project, Paul explained, guiding me to the bench. I knew nothing about gardening when I started. Killed more plants than I cared to admit. But there's something therapeutic about creating beauty from bare earth. We sat side by side, close enough that our shoulders touched. The night air carried the scent of jasmine and the gentle splash of the pond's small fountain. Rex settled at our feet, apparently content to chaperone from a discreet distance. The day we met, Paul said after a comfortable silence. When you called about Max, I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers usually mean telemarketers or someone wanting free security advice. I'm glad you did, I replied softly. So am I, he turned slightly to face me. I've enjoyed getting to know you, Jane, more than I expected to enjoy anything at this stage of my life. Even though our introduction involved elaborate deception and fake federal agents, I teased. He laughed, especially because of that. Showed me your strength, your commitment to doing what's right, even when it's difficult. Not many parents would have the courage to let their children face the consequences of their actions. I'm still not sure I'm doing the right thing, I confessed, especially with Stephen. He's so angry, so resistant. He'll come around, Paul assured me. Or he won't. Either way, you've given him the opportunity to grow up at last. All any parent can do. His understanding, the absence of judgment in his voice, moved me deeply. For years, I'd shouldered my parental burdens alone, making decisions without a partner to validate or challenge my choices. Having someone who saw the complexity of my situation without immediately offering simplistic solutions felt like a gift I hadn't known I needed. Thank you, I said simply, for understanding, for not thinking less of me because my children are complicated. We're all complicated, he replied, his hand finding mine in the dim garden light. It's what makes life interesting. In that moment, with night, blooming flowers scenting the air and Paul's hand warm against mine, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. Not the exhausted resignation I'd mistaken for contentment, but genuine tranquility, the sense that whatever challenges lay ahead, I wasn't facing them alone anymore. When Paul leaned toward me, his intention clear in his eyes, I met him halfway. His kiss was gentle but confident, a perfect balance of respect and desire. Unlike our first kiss in the restaurant parking lot, this one lingered, deepening as I responded with an enthusiasm that surprised even me. When we finally separated, both slightly breathless, Paul brushed a strand of hair from my face with tender precision. I've been wanting to do that properly since our walk by the lake, he admitted. I've been wanting you to, I confessed, feeling a garish blush warm my cheeks despite my age. His smile in response made my heart flutter in a way I'd thought long past. Would it be too forward to tell you I'm hoping this is just the beginning? Not too forward at all, I assured him, leaning in for another kiss that answered his question more eloquently than words could. Rex eventually decided we'd had enough private time, inserting himself between us with a determined nudge that made us both laugh. Jealous? Paul asked his dog, scratching behind the shepherd's ears. He's just reminding us that we have plenty of time, I suggested, though part of me, a part I'd neglected for far too long, wished we could continue where we'd left off. As if reading my thoughts, Paul squeezed my hand. He's right, of course. We have time. No need to rush. The patience in his voice, the implicit promise of future evenings together, warmed me more than any hasty passion could have. This wasn't a fleeting connection, but the careful foundation of something that could last, something worth building slowly. When I finally checked my watch, I was shocked to discover it was nearly midnight. I should go, I said reluctantly. Promised Brenda I wouldn't be too late. Paul walked me to my car, his arm around my waist in a gesture that felt both protective and respectful. At the driver's door, he kissed me once more briefly, but with enough intensity to leave me slightly dazed. I had a wonderful evening, he said, opening my door. So did I replied, surprised by how inadequate the words seemed to express the significance of what had transpired between us. As I drove home, through the quiet streets, I felt like a different woman than the one who had left the house hours earlier. Brenda had been right about the dress, but the transformation went deeper than appearance. Something had awakened in me tonight. Not just desire, though that was certainly part of it, but a sense of my own worth beyond the roles I played for others. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was excited about what tomorrow might bring. Not just the next date with Paul, but all the tomorrows stretching before me. Days I could fill with my own choices, my own rediscovered dreams. Arriving home, I found the house dark except for a single lamp in the living room. A note from Brenda on the counter informed me that Max had been a perfect gentleman and was now asleep in my room. Steven's car was in the driveway, but his room was dark and silent, either already asleep or pretending to be to avoid conversation. I moved quietly through the house, not wanting to disturb either of my children. In my bedroom, Max lifted his head from my pillow, tail thumping in sleepy welcome. I changed and completed my nighttime routine, then slipped into bed beside him, my mind still replaying moments from the evening. I think I'm in trouble, boy. I whispered, stroking his soft fur. The good kind of trouble. He sighed contentedly and settled against me, seemingly unconcerned about the complexities of human relationships. As always, his uncomplicated affection grounded me, a reminder that love in its purest form was simple. It was people who made it complicated. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Stephen's continued resistance, Brenda's impending move, the vast open territory of retirement. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply savor the memory of Paul's kisses, the promise in his eyes, and the glimpse I'd caught of a future brighter than I'd dared to imagine. For the first time in years I fell asleep, looking forward to my own life, not just to facilitating others. I woke to the sound of movement downstairs, drawers opening and closing, muffled voices, the occasional thump of something heavy being set down. For a moment I was disoriented. The memories of last night's kisses in Paul's garden, mingling with the present reality of morning in my own home. Max was already alert, his head cocked toward my bedroom door as he listened to the activity below. Checked the clock. 7:30 a.m. Unusually early for either of my children to be so active. Let's investigate, I murmured to Max, pulling on a robe before heading downstairs. The scene in the kitchen stopped me in my tracks. Stephen stood at the counter, boxing up the mismatched collection of mugs and glasses he'd accumulated over the years. Brenda was at the table, sorting through a stack of mail and papers, organized piles forming around her. Both looked up at my appearance. "Morning, Mom," Brenda greeted cheerfully. "Sorry if we woke you." "What's going on?" I asked, taking in the boxes and bags scattered across the kitchen floor. Stephen cleared his throat awkwardly. "Packing. I found a place. Ryan's letting me take his spare room until I can get something on my own." The announcement, delivered with uncharacteristic humility, momentarily left me speechless. After days of resistance and anger, this sudden capitulation seemed almost suspicious. "That's great," I managed finally. "When did you decide this?" He shrugged, focusing intently on wrapping a Star Wars mug in newspaper. "Last night I did some thinking and realized you were right. It's time." Brenda caught my eye, giving me a subtle nod that suggested she knew more about this transformation than she was saying. I made a mental note to question her later. "Well, I'm glad," I said carefully, not wanting to say anything that might disrupt this fragile progress. "Do you need help?" "Now we've got it," Stephen replied, still not quite meeting my gaze. "Most of my stuff is still in boxes from when I moved back in anyway." I poured myself coffee from the pot they'd already brewed, watching my children work together with an efficiency that surprised me. Whatever had prompted Stephen's change of heart, it had apparently included a truce with his sister. "How was your date?" Brenda asked with calculated casualness, though the gleam in her eye suggested genuine curiosity. "Lovely," I answered, unable to suppress a smile. "Paul's an excellent cook," and she prompted clearly, expecting more details. "And that's all you need to know," I replied primly, though my blush likely gave me away. Stephen made a sound somewhere between a groan and a laugh. "Please, no details. I'm dealing with enough without thinking about my mother's love life." There was no malice in his tone. If anything, he sounded almost amused, but I approached the subject cautiously nonetheless. "Are you really okay with this, Stephen? With me seeing Paul?" He paused his packing, finally looking directly at me. "It's weird," he admitted, But I guess it's also weird that I expected you to just exist for us without having a life of your own. A shrug. Ryan pointed out that was pretty selfish of me. Ryan sounds wise, I observed, filing away this friend's name as a positive influence. He's a pain in the ass, Stephen muttered, though with obvious affection. But yeah, he called me out on a lot of my last night. Said I was acting like a spoiled teenager instead of a grown man. And you listened. I couldn't hide my surprise. Stephen's expression grew serious. When the drunk guy you've been crashing with tells you you're being immature, it's kind of a wake-up call. Brenda snorted that. And he told Stephen either to man up or find somewhere else to sleep. Thanks for that, sis. Stephen shot her an irritated look before turning back to me. I'm sorry about the other night. I was drunk and angry, and said a lot of things I shouldn't have. You're right that it's time for me to stand on my own feet. Just airy. The admission, so contrary to Stephen's usual bravado, touched me deeply. It is scary. Agreed. Change always is. But you're capable of so much. More than you've allowed yourself to be these past few years. He nodded. A determined look replacing his usual cynicism. Yeah, well, time to find out, I guess. By noon, both Stephen and Brenda had packed their essentials, enough to move out, though they'd need to return for the rest of their belongings. We loaded Stephen's car first, the three of us working together in a harmony that felt both familiar and entirely new. As he prepared to leave for Ryan's apartment, I found myself unexpectedly emotional. Call me when you're settled in, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Stephen hesitated, then stepped forward to hug me. Real hug, not the pre-functor embrace he'd offered on holidays and birthdays in recent years. Thanks, Mom, he said, quietly, for not giving up on me, even when I was being an ass. I hugged him back tightly, blinking away tears. Never. No matter what happens, I'm always your mother. He pulled away, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional moment, but making an effort nonetheless. I know I haven't shown it, but I appreciate everything you've done for us, and I'm going to make you proud eventually. You already do, I assured. This right here, taking responsibility, facing your fears. This makes me proud. After he drove away, Brenda helped me carry her boxes to my car. We'd arranged to move her things to Jessica's apartment that afternoon, officially emptying my nest for the first time in years. What changed with Stephen? I asked as we loaded the trunk. Last I saw, he was dead set against moving out. Brenda grinned. I may have called Ryan last night while you were on your date. Filled him in on the situation and suggested he might have more influence than we did at this. Sneaky, I observed admiringly. Strategic, she corrected. I learned from best. Besides, Stephen respects Ryan's opinion, and Ryan's been trying to get him to grow up for years. As we drove toward Jessica's apartment, Brenda chattering about her decorating plans for her new room, I found myself reflecting on the whirlwind of change these past 2 weeks had brought. From the shock of discovering Max had been sold, to the confrontations with my children, to the unexpected romance blooming with Paul, my life had transformed more in 14 days than in the previous 14 years. You're awfully quiet, Mom, Brenda observed as we neared her new home, having second thoughts about the empty nest. Not at all, I assured her truthfully. Just marveling at how quickly everything has changed. For the better though, right? She asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. Absolutely. For the better, I confirmed. For all of us, I think. After helping Brenda settle into her new space, a cozy room in a well-maintained apartment that she and Jessica were already excitedly planning to redecorate, I returned home to a house that felt both strangely empty and wonderfully peaceful. Max greeted me at the door, his entire body wiggling with delight at my return. "Well, boy," I said, kneeling to receive his enthusiastic welcome. "It's just you and me now. How does that feel?" His tail wagged furiously in what I chose to interpret as approval. I wandered through the house, noting how different it felt without the constant presence of my adult children. Not lonely as I might have feared, but open, full of possibility rather than obligation. My phone chimed with a text from Paul. "Thinking of you today. Dinner again tomorrow night. This time let me take you out properly." I smiled, typing back, "I'd love that though. Your garden was pretty perfect." His response came quickly. "The garden will be waiting whenever you're ready to visit again." "Oh, will I?" The promise in those simple words sent a pleasant shiver through me. At 55, I was experiencing the butterflies and anticipation I thought belonged exclusively to youth. It was both terrifying and exhilarating to feel so alive again, so attuned to my own desires. After years of numbness, Max followed me to the back porch where I sat watching the afternoon sunlight filter through the trees in my small yard. On impulse, I pulled out my phone and searched beginner photography classes near me. Several options appeared, including a weekend workshop at the community college starting the following month. Without allowing myself time for second thoughts, I registered and paid the fee. Then, feeling bold, I searched Italy tours for solo travelers. The results were intimidating in their abundance, but I bookmarked several that looked promising for further research later. Small steps toward reclaiming dreams I'd set aside decades ago. Small steps toward becoming the Jane Parker I might have been if life had taken different turns. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my yard, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. The path ahead wasn't entirely clear, but for the first time in years, I was excited to discover where it might lead, not just for my children but for myself. "You know, Max," I said quietly, "if Stephen and Brenda hadn't sold you, none of this might have happened." Max tilted his head, his expressive eyes fixed on mine with canine devotion. "In a strange way," I continued, "their betrayal gave us all a fresh start. Me, them, even you with your weekly playdates with Rex that Paul's already planning." Max's tail thumped against the porch boards at the mention of his new canine friend. "I suppose sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes," I mused, scratching behind his ears the way he loved. "If you can find the courage to face them head on instead of hiding from the pain." The wisdom of that thought settled around me like a comfortable blanket. Through all the upheaval of the past 2 weeks, I discovered strengths I'd forgotten I possessed, connections I hadn't known I was missing, and a future brighter than any I'd dared to imagine in years. As Max and I sat watching the sunset together, I silently thanked my children for their misguided decision to sell my dog. In trying to solve their problems through deception, they had inadvertently given all of us the push we needed to create better, more authentic lives. Sometimes betrayal was actually the beginning of something beautiful. The story continues in the next chapter in the next linked video. But first, I need you to subscribe to join the family as we are looking forward to hit our first 10,000 subscribers target, and feel free to share your story in the comments. You matter, your voice does too.